Welcome back to Hope Tales, where real stories of courage, survival, and miracles in the sky come to life. Today's story is about a 16-year-old girl who faced the unthinkable at 35,000 feet and changed everything. The sun climbed quietly over the horizon as Flight 782 taxied across the shimmering tarmac, preparing for a routine journey across the continent. Passengers settled into their seats, unaware that the most unexpected hero of the day was a girl barely old enough to drive. 16-year-old Isla Rahman sat quietly in seat 14A, a window seat she had chosen simply because. She loved watching the ground fall away beneath the wings. She had no idea that before this flight was over, hundreds of lives would depend on her. Isla was returning home after attending a youth engineering competition. She wasn't a pilot, wasn't a prodigy, wasn't even someone who enjoyed taking unnecessary risks. She was just a girl with a love for machines, a fascination with how things work, and a gentle curiosity about the skies. Her father was a mechanic, and she often watched him repair engines while explaining systems and controls. None of that seemed important that morning, but fate was quietly lining up every piece. The giant aircraft shuddered slightly as it left the runway, engines roaring with confidence. The cabin brightened as they climbed through soft clouds. Isla placed her headphones on, ready to disappear into her music. But something felt different, something she couldn't name. An unease, faint but present, like a whisper behind her thoughts. Far ahead in the cockpit, the two pilots monitored their displays, unaware that a crucial electrical component deep inside the avionics bay had begun to heat rapidly. A small spark jumped, unnoticed and silent, starting a chain reaction that would grow stronger with every passing minute. Back in the cabin, passengers relaxed into the flight. Isla looked outside at the ocean of clouds, imagining the world below disappearing into white. She felt calm, safe. But then the plane gave a strange vibration. Subtle, brief, but enough to make her eyes narrow. Others didn't notice, but her instincts did. The attendants moved through the aisles with practiced ease, offering refreshments, smiles, and the confidence of routine. Everything seemed normal. Almost too normal. The first sign something was wrong came 40 minutes into the flight. A faint burning smell drifted through the cabin. Most passengers ignored it, assuming it was the galley, but Isla sat up straight. She had smelled that before. Electrical insulation overheating. She glanced around. No one else reacted. She took a slow breath, telling herself she was overthinking. But the smell grew stronger for a moment, then faded again. The engines hummed steadily. The cabin remained peaceful. Still, her stomach tightened. She lifted her eyes toward the front of the plane, wishing she could see what the pilots were seeing. Up in the cockpit, a warning light blinked once, then again. The captain frowned, checking a secondary system. Something didn't add up. The co-pilot ran a diagnostic, but the fault seemed to disappear as quickly as it appeared. Both men exchanged looks, confused but not alarmed. They should have been. Isla's heart beat uneasily as she watched a flight attendant walk by. She thought about saying something, but she hesitated. She was young. What if she was wrong? What if everyone laughed it off as nervousness? She stayed silent, gripping her seatbelt a little tighter. 20 minutes later, the second warning struck. The aircraft jolted, not violently, but sharply enough to make passengers gasp and grab their armrests. The lights flickered for a split second. Isla's breath caught. This was no imagination. Something was happening deep inside the systems. The pilots reacted instantly. They tried switching power sources, stabilizing the aircraft, but the avionics panel glitched again. Altitude readings jumped. Autopilot hesitated. Another warning appeared, the same electrical fault that vanished earlier. This time it didn't disappear. In the cabin, tension crept through the air. The flight attendants whispered among themselves, trying to hide worry behind smiles. Isla closed her eyes, replaying every vibration, every smell, every sound. She remembered something her father always said. Machines give warnings. They speak in signs. You just have to listen. And she had been listening the whole time. Another tremor shook the aircraft. This one was bigger. People gasped. Drinks spilled. Overhead bins rattled. The aircraft dropped briefly before catching itself again. Isla felt her pulse surge as panic spread around her. The flight attendants rushed to secure items, their steps quicker, their voices shakier. Then, the engines changed tone. Not a failure, not a stall, but something off balance, uneven. And for the first time, a genuine fear entered Isla's chest. Up front, alarms began to multiply. Multiple systems failed in rapid sequence. Screens flickered. The pilots fought to keep control as the aircraft drifted off its intended flight path. They struggled to isolate the failure. Something was burning behind the instrument panel. Something vital. The captain reached for the radio. He never finished the call. A sudden bright flash filled the cockpit, followed by darkness. The electrical bus powering the primary controls failed completely. Smoke curled upward. The emergency systems tried to engage, but the crippled avionics didn't respond. The co-pilot tried switching to alternate power, but another spark erupted. Stronger, hotter. Within seconds, both pilots were coughing, eyes burning, struggling to stay conscious. The plane tilted. Passengers screamed as trays slid and drinks toppled. Isla grabbed her seat back, forcing herself to stay calm even as fear swallowed the cabin. Her mind raced. Something catastrophic had happened in the cockpit. Then, another smell hit her. Not electrical. Smoke. Real smoke. Thin, gray, curling through the air vents. This time, everyone smelled it. Chaos filled the cabin. Fear, panic, confusion. The flight attendants ran toward the cockpit, but the door remained shut. They knocked. Called out. No response. Isla watched in horror as one attendant tried opening the door manually. Nothing. Locked. Jammed. Inside, the pilot slumped dangerously. Oxygen masks dangled uselessly. The backup systems flickered in and out like dying fireflies. The aircraft, now partially without control, began descending gradually. Not a dive, but a slow, dangerous drop. Isla's seat shook. Her hands trembled, but her mind sharpened. She remembered cockpit layouts she studied for fun. She remembered watching simulator videos. She remembered her father telling her how backup systems could be manually powered, if someone reached them in time. The attendant struggled at the cockpit door again, desperate, terrified. And then something unbelievable happened. The plane rolled slightly, sending a heavy jolt through the cabin. Isla's phone slipped from her hands. People cried. Fear filled every corner of the aircraft. Isla stood. Her heart pounded like thunder. She didn't know what she was about to do. She didn't know if she could do anything at all. But she stepped into the aisle anyway, because something inside her refused to sit and wait. Something inside her whispered that she was meant to move. And in that moment, without knowing it, the girl who never imagined becoming a hero took her first step toward the cockpit, where two unconscious pilots waited, where hundreds of lives hung in the balance, where fate had already chosen her. The cabin trembled again, a low, shuddering vibration that ran beneath, the floor like a warning, from the bones of the aircraft itself. Passengers clung to their seats as overhead lights flickered, shadows stretching in nervous rhythms across frightened faces. In the middle of the chaos stood Isla, the 16-year-old girl who had risen when everyone else froze. Her heart beat rapidly, but her steps were steady. She took one careful stride forward, then another, moving down the aisle toward the front of the aircraft. Every footstep felt heavier, as if the plane itself was testing her resolve. The aisle seemed impossibly long. Flight attendants hurried past her, trying to calm panicked passengers, but their fearful glances toward the cockpit told the truth. Something catastrophic had happened up there. Smoke drifted through the ventilation, thin but unmistakable, curling like gray threads in the air. Isla covered her mouth with her sleeve as she moved. She could feel the intensity of the moment, crushing in from all directions, crying children, trembling adults, the rumble of the engines struggling under uneven load. But none of it stopped her. She reached the front of the aircraft, where the flight attendants clustered around the cockpit door. One of them slammed her shoulder against it in desperation, but the door barely moved. It had locked itself when the primary system failed. Isla's eyes scanned the controls near the door. She remembered a safety documentary explaining how cockpit doors could jam shut during electrical failures. Her mind raced. Somewhere behind that sealed barrier, the pilots could be unconscious, incapacitated, or worse. The plane jolted suddenly, sending luggage tumbling from overhead compartments. Isla grabbed a seat back for balance. The nose dipped briefly, then jerked upward again, as if the aircraft was fighting against itself. Alarms blared faintly from behind the cockpit door, muffled but constant. One flight attendant stumbled, bracing herself against a wall. Another moved to help her. For a moment, Ayla was alone near the sealed door. She placed her hand against it. It felt warm. Too warm. Heat radiated from inside, confirming what she feared. Something inside the avionics or instrument board had burned out. The electrical failure was intensifying, and the pilots were trapped inside with it. Ayla inhaled shakily, then turned to the attendants. She pointed toward a small panel on the ceiling. Above the door, an emergency override. System most passengers never noticed. The attendants hesitated, then followed her gaze. One climbed onto the galley counter, reaching for the panel. Her hands trembled, but she managed to pry it open. Inside was a mechanical release latch, rarely used, older than most passengers would ever know. With the electrical systems failing, it was the only chance. The attendant pulled, strained, then pulled harder. A hollow click echoed through the front cabin. The door hissed. It unsealed. Ayla felt her breath catch as smoke drifted out, not thick but enough to sting the eyes. Without waiting for instructions, she stepped forward, pushed the door open, and entered a world of chaos she had only imagined on screens and in books. The cockpit was dim, illuminated only by flickering red emergency lights and a few struggling displays. The air smelled of burnt circuits. The captain slumped sideways against his seat, unconscious. The co-pilot hung forward, mask dangling near his face but unused. Both men were breathing, but barely. Sweat glistened on their foreheads. Ayla froze for a moment. She had never been inside a real cockpit before. She had studied photos, watched videos, memorized layouts for fun, but this was no simulation. This was real. This was life or death. The plane banked slightly, and she staggered but caught herself on the back of the captain's seat. Her hands trembled as she scanned the instrument panel. Most of the primary systems were offline, their screens dark. The autopilot light was dead. Only a handful of displays blinked weakly, powered by the emergency bus fighting to stay alive. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, explaining how planes had multiple layers of backup systems, how manual controls could override failing electronics, how hydraulic systems could guide the aircraft even when digital instruments went dark. Her pulse thundered. Behind her, passengers screamed as the plane shook again. The attendants waited anxiously at the door, afraid to enter, but unable to step away. Ayla pushed herself into the captain's chair. Her legs barely reached the pedals. For a moment, fear surged through her so strongly she nearly stopped breathing. The weight of hundreds of lives pressed onto her small shoulders. She wasn't trained. She wasn't qualified. She wasn't supposed to be here. But then the aircraft lurched violently to the left, nearly throwing her out of the chair. Instinct took over. She grabbed the yoke with both hands. The metal felt cold under her fingers, trembling with the plane's uneven stability. She braced her feet as best she could. Outside the windshield, clouds streaked past in chaotic motion. The horizon tilted dangerously. Ayla held the yoke steady. The plane responded, shakily, slowly, but it responded. Her heart pounded. She remembered how simulators showed the relationship between the yoke and the aircraft's tilt. She remembered how pulling gently adjusted the pitch. She remembered how steady hands could calm a panicking machine. The left roll eased. Not completely, but enough. The attendants murmured in disbelief behind her. She didn't look back. All her attention belonged to the struggling aircraft. The emergency altimeter flickered, showing a slow but noticeable descent. The emergency power indicator blinked, struggling to maintain essential systems. The smoke inside the cockpit thinned slightly as the failing components cooled. But the heat remained, and the smell of burnt wiring lingered, a reminder that the danger was far from over. Ayla lifted her eyes to the radio panel. Powerless. Dead. She had no way to call for help. No way to contact the ground. No way to tell anyone what had happened. The aircraft shook again, pitching forward slightly. Ayla adjusted the yoke, her arms straining against the force of the motion. She wasn't strong, but she was focused. Every second sharpened her instincts further. The oxygen masks hung above her, untouched. She reached up and pulled one toward her, securing it. Then she glanced at the unconscious pilots. She couldn't drag them out. She couldn't revive them, but she could keep them alive by securing their masks. She placed them carefully. Another tremor hit the plane, stronger than before. Ayla gripped the yoke tight. Both her feet pressed against the floor. her body tensed, ready for the unexpected. The plane steadied. The cabin behind her fell into a terrified silence, broken only by quiet sobbing and the distant thrum of uneven engines. Isla stared at the dark instrument panels, then at the small handful still functioning on emergency power. She had control, barely, but control was enough for now. For the first time since the incident began, a flicker of hope emerged. But she knew the truth. Keeping the plane level was only the beginning. Ahead of her lay storms, failing systems, and a crippled aircraft drifting far off course, and she was just 16. Yet in the chaos-filled sky, she was the only one still fighting. The aircraft groaned like a wounded creature as Isla steadied the yoke, her fingers tightening with each new vibration ripping through the fuselage. She had managed to level the plane for a moment, but moments were fragile things, easily broken by the sky. And the sky was far from done testing her. The clouds ahead darkened, swelling with turbulence like a warning wall rising across the horizon. The altitude needle trembled, dropping little by little as the crippled systems struggled to maintain power. The engines hummed with an uneven rhythm, as if debating whether they were willing to keep going. Behind her, the cabin was silent in the most terrifying way, hundreds of breaths held at once. Waiting, hoping, fearing. Isla felt their weight pressing into her back. Lives she had never met, people she may never see again, all depending on a girl who never expected to be here. Lightning flashed in the distance. The storm was unavoidable. Isla's chest tightened. Her eyes flicked to the remaining emergency screens. Altitude. Basic attitude indicator, a weak compass that kept dimming at random intervals. Everything else was dead. She pushed her foot against the rudder pedal, adjusting their drift. The plane responded sluggishly, its movements heavy and reluctant. Wind slammed against the fuselage. The aircraft dipped quickly, then jerked upward. Isla held the yoke with everything she had, her arms shaking with the effort. The turbulence hit again, stronger this time. The plane rolled left. Alarms chirped weakly, fading in and out like dying birds. In the cabin, a child cried. Someone prayed. A flight attendant clenched the seat back, her knuckles pale. Isla whispered nothing, but her heart roared inside her chest. Another drop. The nose tilted downward in a long, frightening arc. The horizon vanished into a swirl of black clouds. Rain splattered against the windshield, turning into streaks of frantic motion. The wipers didn't respond. Their system had failed along with everything else. The storm swallowed the aircraft whole. Thunder cracked so close it rattled the metal frame. The plane shuddered violently. Isla's grip slipped for a second, but she fought it back, pulling the yoke with a sharp, desperate motion. Her shoulders burned. Her breath came in short bursts. Sweat rolled down the side of her face. She was fighting a machine far bigger and stronger than her, but she refused to let go. A glimpse of her father's workshop flashed through her mind. Engines open, tools scattered, his calm voice explaining how planes were built to survive more than people think. Built to endure, built to fight. She hoped he was right. A violent slam hit the right wing. The aircraft lurched sideways. Passengers screamed as the cabin tilted sharply. Isla threw all her weight into countering the roll. The yoke resisted, stiff and reluctant. Every muscle in her arms strained. The wing leveled. Barely. Her breathing shook. Her legs trembled. But she didn't stop. Her eyes scanned the few working instruments again. The compass flickered, went dark, flickered back to life. The altitude reading dropped another 100 feet. Then another. The storm was pulling them down. Isla's gaze sharpened. She pulled the yoke back slightly, stabilizing the fall. The emergency hydraulics groaned. The plane fought back, then finally lifted. Only a little, but enough to stop the rapid descent. Aaliyah exhaled shakily, but the storm wasn't done. A sudden ear-splitting burst of static crackled through the overhead speaker, a sound so loud she flinched. For a moment, the radio hummed with life, filled with chaotic noise. Her heart leapt. If she could reach the frequency, if the radio came back, even for seconds, someone could hear them. But before she could react, the radio died again, going silent with a small, hopeless click. The storm roared outside, mocking the silence inside. The lights above her flickered again. One died permanently, leaving half the cockpit in deep shadow. Isla adjusted her grip, leaning closer to the remaining instruments. Her breath fogged the cracked glass panel in front of her. Her hands were trembling, but steady enough to keep fighting. Lightning illuminated the sky again, revealing a massive thunderhead forming directly. Ahead, a towering wall of cloud stretching from the ocean below to the heavens above. They were flying straight into its heart. Isla swallowed hard. She pushed the yoke slightly left, steering them toward a thinner patch of storm. But the wind shoved them back like a giant, unseen hand. The engines roared with strain. The plane rattled. The metal around her shivered under the pressure. Another drop, another violent shake. The storm tightened its grip. In the cabin, oxygen masks dangled above terrified passengers. The attendants rushed to help those struggling to breathe. Isla heard the muffled panic behind her, coughs, cries, fear. Yet even that couldn't distract her. Her world had narrowed to the yoke, the altimeter, and the storm. The aircraft jolted again, hard. Isla slammed forward, her seatbelt catching her just in time. The yoke jerked violently to one side as wind hammered the plane. She fought back. She forced the yoke straight again. Her muscles screamed. The storm screamed louder. The aircraft plunged suddenly, hundreds of feet in seconds. Passengers cried out. Overhead, bins flew open. Luggage crashed to the floor. Isla's heart nearly stopped. The plane shook uncontrollably, spiraling into a downdraft. Her pulse roared in her ears. She pulled. Hard. Her arms burned. Her shoulders felt like tearing. But she didn't stop. She pulled until her fingers went numb. And the aircraft slowed. The plunge eased, then stopped. The altimeter steadied, wavering but no longer falling. Isla gasped for air, her lungs burning, but she refused to let go of the controls. For a brief moment, the storm thinned. A narrow window of calmer sky appeared, a blue-gray slit between walls of cloud. Isla seized the chance, turning the yoke gently, guiding the plane toward that break. The aircraft resisted, fought, shuddered, but moved. Little by little, she forced the crippled plane into the sliver of safer sky. She didn't know how long the opening would last. She didn't know what lay beyond it. She only knew that this window was the single breath of hope they had been given. As the aircraft edged closer, the turbulence softened. The violent shaking eased into steady tremors. The rain thinned. The lightning faded behind them. Isla exhaled, gripping the controls with trembling determination. But ahead, far ahead, the horizon revealed something far worse than storms. Silence on the radio, failing altitude, weakening emergency power, and fuel dropping faster than it should. The next battle wasn't the sky. It was survival. Isla's arms burned from holding the yoke, but she didn't dare release it. Every movement of the aircraft, every tremor, every vibration, ran through her like electric fire. The storm had passed, but the battle was far from over. The plane floated on weakened engines, running low on emergency power. Fuel gauges flickered dangerously, showing numbers that made her heart sink. Below, the land stretched like a patchwork quilt, fields, roads, and the faint glint of rivers. The airport was still miles away. The thought that hundreds of lives depended on her guidance pressed down on her chest, heavy and suffocating. She took a deep breath, forcing her racing heart to slow. The emergency lights in the cockpit flickered one last time before stabilizing. Only a few essential instruments remained functional: altitude, attitude, rudder, and speed indicators. All else was gone, dead. Isla leaned forward, scanning every dial, memorizing every blinking light, every movement, every subtle vibration. She had no autopilot, no radio, no promise of help. Only her instincts, her courage, and the fragments of knowledge her father had taught her about flight mechanics. The aircraft shuddered as it descended over the final stretch toward the airport. Wind currents tossed it sideways. The left wing dipped dangerously low. She pushed the yoke gently to the right, forcing balance, while her foot pressed against the rudder pedal. Every adjustment was calculated, yet the plane seemed to have a mind of its own. It resisted, threatening to spiral out of control at any moment. Below, she could see the runway. It appeared impossibly small from this height, like a fragile lifeline barely stretching across the horizon. Her stomach twisted as she gauged distance, speed, and wind. She had studied simulations before, but this was no simulator. One wrong movement, one misjudgment, and there would be no second chance. The plane dipped again. A sudden gust caught the nose, sending it toward the ground. Isla yanked back on the yoke, straining with every ounce of strength. The engines groaned under the effort. But the plane responded, slowly. Precariously, but it responded. She felt a flicker of hope. Passengers in the cabin clutched seatbacks, bracing for impact, unaware that their fate rested in the hands of a girl barely 16. Flight attendants moved quickly to reassure them. Though their eyes betrayed terror and disbelief, Isla's determination radiated backward through the cockpit, almost palpable. Everyone instinctively knew that she was their anchor. The runway grew larger, closer, stretching like a promise across the chaos. But the plane's descent rate was uneven. She adjusted subtly, banking gently, coaxing the aircraft downward. The nose gear indicators flickered. No lights. The main landing gear? The same. She had to rely on instinct. Visual cues from the runway would guide her. Her heart thudded in her ears. The landing sequence she had memorized in simulators now became real actions, executed under extreme pressure. Speed control, pitch adjustments, stabilizing roll. Each second felt like an eternity. Outside, the wind buffeted the fuselage. The tires groaned as she imagined their first contact with the runway, and then the ground approached faster. The runway markings blurred. She lowered the nose gently, pulling back slightly as the landing gear hit the tarmac. A vibration ran through the aircraft, but the plane remained stable. She adjusted rudder and brake pedals with trembling precision, guiding the plane along the runway's center line. Sparks flew as the tires skidded, but the massive aircraft responded obediently. The engines roared as they slowed. Smoke rose faintly from overheated brakes. Passengers erupted in gasps, sobs, and screams, not of fear but of relief. Flight attendants embraced, tears running down their faces. Isla's body shook with exhaustion, adrenaline, and disbelief. She had done it. Somehow, miraculously, she had brought the plane and everyone on board safely to the ground. Emergency crews rushed to meet them, but the danger had passed. No fire, no catastrophic failure, just survival. Hundreds of lives were safe because a 16-year-old had dared to step into the cockpit, facing the impossible, trusting her instincts and courage. Isla slumped in the captain's seat, her hands still gripping the yoke. She felt the reality of what had just happened wash over her. Relief, exhaustion, and an overwhelming sense of disbelief mingled into tears that streamed silently down her cheeks. Around her, the passengers slowly unbuckled, some hugging each other, others kneeling in silent gratitude. The pilots, now recovering from unconsciousness, blinked at the scene before them. They were alive. The passengers were alive. The aircraft, though damaged, was intact. And the girl who had never imagined being a hero sat quietly. Trembling, exhausted, yet triumphant, she had faced the unthinkable and prevailed. News cameras would later capture her stepping out of the cockpit, covered in sweat and ash from the malfunctioning instruments, yet radiant with courage. The headlines would call her a miracle, a hero, a legend. But for Isla, it was simple. She had done what needed to be done. She had listened, observed, acted, and survived. She had turned fear into action, panic into resolve, and in doing so, she had changed countless lives forever. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the runway, Isla gazed at the sky she loved so dearly. It had been terrifying, relentless, unforgiving, but it had also allowed her to rise, to fight, to survive. And for a brief, shining moment, she understood the truth. Courage isn't measured by age, by experience, or by skill. It is measured by the will to stand, even when everything else falls apart. The aircraft was silent now, except for the gentle hum of cooling engines. The passengers slowly exited, their eyes wide with wonder and gratitude. Flight attendants whispered praises, tears still streaking their faces. And at the center of it all, Isla sat, the young girl who had faced the impossible, who had held the sky in her hands, and who had brought everyone home. Isla's story would be told for years to come. The 16-year-old who landed the plane when hope seemed lost, a living testament that courage, determination, and calm resolve could truly move mountains. Or, in this case, conquer the skies. The miracle had happened. The hero was 16, and the world would never forget her.